Hey, good morning, Lyceans. I hope you're doing well. Welcome to another, let's just move it here. Welcome to another lesson in EAPP. We are now in part two of literary criticism. Now, with part two, actually, part two and three, we'll be talking about the theories that we'll be using for EAPP, as well as how to use them in a very simplified way. Now, I've grouped all these theories into a very homogeneous category. Um, with part two, we'll be focusing on. Oh, with part two, we'll be focusing on formalism, structuralism, deconstruction, and post-structuralism. Now, I've grouped the four into one particular slide mainly because they are almost same. They're almost the same. Um, all of these theories, these four theories, are very, you should say, objective by nature. So, as to why they're objective and how they are used to critique a particular art form, we'll be talking about now. Let's start with formalism. Now, with formalism, formalism is very text-based in literature, in the context of literature. Also, formalism puts more importance of the literary form, that is for literature, with the visual form and the cinematic form in film. Everything else is irrelevant. So we're only critiquing the material based on the material itself, not on who made it or who it's from. Now, according to Aristotle, the object, the manner, and the means and effect of the imitation are all what we are trying to know as a formalist um, critic, as a formalist critic. Sorry, as a formalist critic. So we'll be looking at, let's say, for example, with novels, with literature in general, we'll be looking at the words used, the phrases, how they were parsed, the sentence, how they were structured in a sense, the manner of speaking. Was it very modern? Was it very cheesy? Um, the effect of imitation. Did it imitate that particular topic in a very human way possible? With film, we'll be talking about the scenes. What does it scene? What does this scene mean in a particular real life scenario? Also, formalism encourages close reading of the text without relying on the poet's reputation or history. With film, it encourages you to watch the film again, rewatch, so to speak. Um, with a painting, formalism would require you to look at it closer. So look at you should notice everything, not just the subject of the painting, but everything in particular. Now, as formalists, you should focus on the organization, the structure, the verbal nuances for literature, and multiple meanings depending on um, the material used for a particular art form. And so, let's say, for example, you're looking at an abstract painting and you look at the colors, the shapes, the whatever forms it produced as um, instructed by the artist, um, makes the meaning of that particular abstract painting. So that's formalism. With literature, since we are text based, we'll just be looking at how the words were used, the structure of the words. Um, let's say, for example, between three paragraphs in a novel, the three paragraphs gave the novel a sense of urgency, a sense of horror, a sense of excitement, something like that. So that's formalism. Again, this is very surface level. When we go back to class, we'll be talking about this more. Now, structuralism is like formalism, that um, we are trying to get the meaning based on the material itself. What but what makes structuralism very different from formalism is um, structuralism assumes that with every signifier there's only one universal meaning. So how's that? I'll tell you later on. But with structuralism, it concentrates on literature in this particular context as a system of signs that have no inherent meaning except in their agreed upon or conventional relation to one another. So let's say, for example, um, in a Filipino novel, you see the word langgam. Now, langgam, depending on which region you are, has a different meaning. And in that particular region, it is universal. So let's say, for example, with langgam, if you say langgam, or if you have written a novel with the word langgam in it, in, in the Luzon region area, then langgam will take the object of an insect, of an ant, right? So when we say langgam, it's ants. We can't refute that because at that particular um, region, the agreed upon or the conventional um, meaning of langgam is actually ants, as translated. Now, if you change the location, let's say the Visayan region or somewhere in Mindanao, um, langgam will take a different meaning. Now, langgam would mean a bird, which takes the case that in every region, the universal meaning of langgam would be depending or would be very dependent on the agreed upon meaning or and the conventional relation to that particular word in their region. Now, structuralism makes us think of literature as a part of a larger system, and the fact that everything we know, one thing of something, is that something is not something else. Meaning to say, a sign will always have, or a word will always have one particular meaning. Let's say, for example, let's put the same example with formalism. We'll be using the abstract painting. And with an abstract painting, if you look at the painting and you try to take into consideration the strokes of the brushes, the colors used by the artist, the form taken by the painting after the artist was done, they have inherent meaning depending on the universal perception. So let's say, for example, if the painting has red, yellow, and green, green will have the universal meaning of life. Red will have the universal meaning of hate or anger, and yellow will have the universal meaning of joy or excitement. So that's structuralism. Now, deconstruction. Deconstruction is very, very different from structuralism. Many would say that deconstruction is actually a continuation of structuralism. Well, apparently it's not a continuation of structuralism. Deconstruction is actually the opposite of structuralism. Now, according to deconstruction, every text has within itself some way of unraveling itself and taking it apart and finding these inconsistencies so that we might be able to understand it. According to Derrida, um, all interpretation of a text simply constitutes further text, which means there's no outside the text at all. Therefore, it is impossible for a text to have a stable meaning. And in deconstruction, one of the ruling, you should say, factors is that everything has no meaning. Everything means nothing. Everything can mean something else, and everything will have multiple meanings to a different text or to, let's say, a different demographic. Now, what does this mean? With structuralism, when we do a structural approach, a structural critic approach to a art form, we try to take into consideration different components of the art form. Let's say, for example, with the abstract painting, if you're doing a very structural approach, um, you take every component, the brush strokes, the colors used, the meaning of those colors, the overall shape of that particular meaning, which would constitute the overall expression of that particular abstract painting. Now, if you're going to use a deconstruction approach to critique an abstract painting, we won't be taking out the components. Instead, we'll be putting those components in different areas. So let's say, for example, in abstract painting, we have red, yellow, and green, and then you put them different parts of the painting. Does it have the same meaning? You look at the overall shape of the painting as a result of the artist's expression. Does it have a different meaning if you flip the painting upside down, and etc.? Now, what does this give you? It gives you different meanings depending on how you look at the particular painting. Let's say, for example, with red, yellow, and green, um, if in a very structural approach, green would always signify life, and in a very deconstruction approach, green does not signify only life. Green also signifies death, rebirth. So in rebirth, there's always that component of death. So we can't take that out. Also with green, um, it signifies in a very extreme way no humans involved, right? Now, how do I say that? Well, if you take the context of pollution, if there's human, there's always if there are humans, there's always pollution. If there are no humans, there will be no pollution at all. So it's like a very dark meaning. Let's say, for example, another example with the color red. Red does not only signify anger or hate; it also signifies love. It also signifies, in a very particular context, it will somehow signify joy. Um, with yellow, it somehow would signify disgust in a certain context, and yellow would sometimes not only signify joy, it will also sometimes signify pain, as it is the only color that you see when your eyes are being flashed by a flashlight, something like that. So with deconstruction, we don't actually have just one universal meaning. Now here comes the tricky part. When you're doing a structuralist approach to a particular art form, why do we feel the need to take everything apart? Well, for us to know the structure, we need to take apart the components. With a novel, we take apart the words used, how the paragraphs were arranged, how the events of that particular novel was arranged depending on the words used, how the sentences were parsed in a particular way, those kind of things. With deconstruction, if you're trying to do a deconstruction type of critique to a novel, you don't take things apart. You put them on that particular novel, and then you close read them. You know what I mean? You close read them so that you'll have one meaning, and then you read it again in a different context. You have a different meaning. So that's deconstruction. Again, don't be too saddened if you feel confused with this lesson. Again, we'll be talking about this more when we go back to class. This is just a very surface level explanation, just the things you need to know. So again, to make it to summarize, with formalism in the context of literature, will be very text-based. Um, we'll be looking at the source material, and we won't be looking at different texts for for the meaning of that particular um, words, or the meaning of that novel in a formalistic approach. With structuralism, it's somehow like formalism, but we intertext. So we don't look at the word in the novel and then look for the meaning in the novel. We can look elsewhere, or we can look at our own perspective of the meaning of that particular word to us. With deconstruction, it's actually you're in text. You are trying to get information from different texts, but you take that this particular word has no meaning at all because different readers will have different meanings, and therefore they will have multiple meanings, and therefore there are no universal meaning to that particular word. Sounds about right. Let's go to our last topic, which is post-structuralism. Now, with post-structuralism, it criticizes structuralism and its claims to scientifically objectify a particular work of art, including its assumption that the system of signs in which language operates is stable and is universal. So this is the continuation of structuralism, post-structuralism. Um, Post-structuralism, like deconstruction, they don't believe that a particular art form or a particular component of that particular art form has a universal meaning. Okay? Now, with the absence of a universal meaning, post-structuralists would replace the fixation on it by eliciting meaning from other books, so intertext, from the readers, from other experts. So they'll be, yeah, they're still going to take apart the components, but instead of setting up just one particular universal meaning for these components, they'll be eliciting different meanings to a particular sign. Let's say using the same example before with the abstract painting. So we have an abstract painting. It has the colors red, yellow, and blue. Yeah, red, yellow, and green. And you look at the painting and the form that it has taken once the artist was done painting. So yeah, let's say for example with red, you can have the meanings hatred, love, sometimes joy and anger with the color red. However, if you ask another set of demographic, let's say children, what does this color mean? Probably they would say stop sign, something like that, or the color of a lollipop. So they would say lollipop. They would have a different meaning to red. So the overall meaning of that abstract painting would be very different to a child. If you ask, let's say, an army veteran who has participated in World War II, red will have a different meaning. It will mean blood, so it will be it would have a very horrifying experience for that particular veteran, and so on. So you see, with post-structuralism, we don't have a universal meaning. We have different meanings depending on a demographic. So that's still, we're still structuring, we're still constructing a meaning, taking it apart so that we would be able to know the structure. But instead of just taking only one meaning, we'll have multiple meanings and at the same time from different demographics. And still, it is a structural approach, but a very post-structural approach. Okay. Okay, so this is the last theory, post-structuralism. Now, to summarize, when you say formalism, it is very text-based, very material-based. With structuralism, it's still material-based, so it will be taking it apart every component of the material so that we'll be able to know the structure of that art form. With deconstruction, it's opposite. We put them so that we will be able to know one meaning and then another meaning depending on context if you would like to move the structure around. With post-structuralism, still we'll be able to take apart the components, but instead of only taking one particular meaning to that particular object, will have multiple meanings from different demographics, from other books, from other experts, and the like to form and to know the structure of that particular um, art form. All right, guys, I hope it helps. Um, Stay tuned for the next installment of um, this lesson. I hope you had a good time listening to this lesson, and I hope you've learned something, even though this is very surface level, excuse me, type of class. If you feel confused, don't worry. We'll have a follow up to this when we return to class. Okay, when we return to class, I promise you we'll have more discussions on different theories and how to use them in depth, and to actually, and we'll be doing it um what do you call that, in a very impromptu kind of way, so that you'll be able to um, give you more differentiators um, between different theories. Okay, thank you so much. Have a wonderful day. See you next time. Ciao.